Get that seal closed now, or you'll be sucking vacuum with the rest of them, Commander Ryan Vax shouted into his suit mic, his throat raw from recycled air and panic. The words cracked across the fractured bay of Vesta Station, where emergency lights pulsed crimson against drifting sheets of frozen blood. His boots struck magnetic against the tilted deck as he braced against a spar that had once held cargo nets, now twisted steel dragging sparks each time a panel tore free. The corridor beyond him howled as pressure vented into open black, and fragments of tools, papers, and bodies spun together in a nightmare spiral. A junior engineer clawed at the emergency lever beside the hatch. His gloves slipped across the frozen surface until Vax grabbed his forearm, shoved him sideways, and yanked the release. The blast door ground forward, scraping against warped rails, until finally it slammed shut and sealed with a jarring clang. For a moment, silence hung heavy inside their helmets, broken only by the harsh rasp of breathing. Then the engineer slumped against the bulkhead, gasping, "Section 6 is gone. They cut straight through us." Vax didn't answer. He already knew the truth. The tungsten rods had hit without ceremony, punching through habitat modules as though they were paper shells. Council patrol ships, armored and indifferent, had fired into a relief convoy meant for Earth's civilians. They called it enforcement, but what he saw on his suit's heads-up display was butchery. Habitats ruptured, frozen lungs collapsing, men and boys hurled into the void because they belonged to the wrong planet. He snapped a command. "Team Bravo, regroup on me. Prioritize survivors, not salvage." He steadied his voice, though fury pressed against his chest like fire. If he allowed anger to lead, they would waste precious minutes searching for wreckage instead of people. The visor feed lit up with green tags as the others acknowledged. A faint vibration carried through the hull, a deep tremor that rattled the soles of his boots. Vax knew the sound well. It was the push of Council gunboats latching docking arms, confident enough to board wreckage they had just destroyed. He clenched his teeth and muttered, "Scavengers, already here." His comm officer, Ledomar, spoke from the next passage. "Commander, our tug is still powered. We can maneuver under debris cover, but the clamps are half burned. If we stay much longer, we'll lose her." His voice carried the steady cadence of a man who refused to panic, even when his own skin was at stake. "Keep her warm," Vax replied. "We're not leaving without pulling who we can." He marched forward, his helmet lamps piercing drifting clouds of ice crystals. Every flicker of light revealed faces frozen in death, eyes wide, limbs stiff in fractured suits. He forced himself to step past them without stopping. Every second meant another sealed hatch closing, another man suffocating. At the junction ahead, two security officers knelt beside a twisted bulkhead. A survivor pounded against a narrow gap, his suit scratched and leaking. "Pull him through," Vax ordered. One guard pried the panel aside with a hydraulic spreader, while the other reached in, locked onto the man's harness, and dragged him out with a grunt. The survivor's scream filled the channel, high-pitched, raw with terror. He thrashed until Vax seized his shoulders. "Look at me," Vax shouted. The man's visor pressed against his own. "You're alive. Stay with us." The panic thrashing slowed, the man's chest heaving. Vax nodded. "Good. We're moving," he signaled forward, forcing the team down another corridor. As they advanced, Mar's voice returned, harder now. "Commander, we've got incoming transmissions. Council channels. They're labeling this strike as a lawful embargo enforcement, claiming Vesta was storing contraband for your fleet." His tone sharpened with disgust. "They're already writing the report before we bury the bodies." Vax growled low. "Record every feed, every word. If they want a ledger, we'll give them one." He knew Mar's talent lay in documentation, in gathering facts so dry and undeniable that even the Council's courts could not spin them away. For now, survival came first, but vengeance would arrive on paper as much as in battle. They reached the bay where the tug waited. Its hull was scored, plating charred, but the drive still pulsed with blue heat. Crewmates hauled stretchers aboard, their gloves slick with frozen condensation. Each rescued man was strapped into a seat, mask pressed to his face, oxygen pouring in sharp gusts that smelled of copper and sweat. The air inside the tug carried an iron tang, heavy with recycled filters. Devore, the quartermaster, looked up from his console. We can take 30 more maximum. Any more and life support breaks down. His eyes, shadowed and lined, flickered to the corridor. You know there are hundreds out there, Vax answered with steel in his voice. We save who we can. Then we make sure those deaths by something. He gripped the man's shoulder, firm, anchoring them both. Not one more life wasted without record. Understood? The tug shuddered as docking clamps disengaged. Through the forward viewport, Vax saw the wreck of Vesta Station drifting, its modules spinning slowly, torn open like a carcass. Beyond it, Council gunboats hovered in cold formation, their hulls gleaming under fractured starlight. Their comms blared warnings, declaring Earth's exile complete, rights stripped, contracts revoked. To them, this slaughter was paperwork executed at range. As the tug rolled into debris shadow, Vax leaned close to Mar. Send a burst. Encrypt it, scatter it. The world must see what they've done. Mar's fingers danced over the console. Already in motion, Commander. His voice carried no triumph, only weary certainty. For the first time since the strike began, Vax allowed himself a breath that was more than reflex. His chest still ached, but within that ache, a thought hardened. Exile was not an end. It was ignition. The tug angled away from the wreck, its drives flaring against the cold dark. Behind them, Vesta remained a scar on memory, a wound carved open for the galaxy to witness. Ahead lay Earth, fractured, angry, and cornered. Vax tightened the straps across his chest, his jaw locked. He whispered into the silent cabin where rescued men sat stunned, eyes glassy and hands trembling. We will answer this. With steel, with record, with every stone they thought worthless. They wanted us banished. They'll find what exile makes of us. Lock that hatch before you breathe easier, or we'll lose half this bay. Ryan Vax barked as the tug slid into Earth's orbital dock. His words cracked across the channel, heavy with the authority of a man who had already watched too many doors fail and too many lungs rupture in silence. The docking clamps engaged, the tug groaned under strain, and for a fleeting moment he felt the shiver of relief as gravity took hold. Inside the vessel, rescued men slumped in their harnesses, their gaunt faces streaked with sweat and frost. The sharp tang of burnt filters filled the cabin, mixing with the copper bite of dried blood on cracked lips. The hatch swung open to reveal crews waiting in stained overalls, medical teams pushing stretchers forward, their gloves smudged from endless work. The survivors were lifted out one by one, some groaning weakly, others staring through the rescuers as though their minds had already drifted far from flesh. Vax followed last, his boots clanging against the gangway. The weight of silence around him was heavier than the steel itself. Dozens of dock workers had gathered along the rail, staring with tightened jaws and hard eyes. They had heard reports of Vesta, but seeing men carried out half-dead spoke louder than any broadcast. Admiral Punev stood at the end of the platform, stocky, shoulders squared, eyes fixed on Vax. His voice carried across the hall, rough as gravel. I read your burst. I saw the feeds. You understand what this means, Commander? It means they will keep killing until we decide how to stop them, Vax answered flatly. His throat burned from recycled air and shouting, but his words came with the weight of iron. The Admiral nodded once, then turned sharply, signaling Vax to follow. They moved into the command chamber, where laser plasma displays flickered across curved walls, feeding maps of Earth's settlements, supply lines, and council patrol patterns. Each red marker bled across the blue grid like an infection spreading. Engineers and officers worked at their stations, their voices low but tense, the air thick with the bitter tang of overused coffee and sweat soaked into uniforms worn too long. At the center stood Hal Orn, lead systems engineer, his face pale. Beneath the glow of the displays, he gestured toward the map. Council ships are raiding at will. Convoys are turning back. Our yards are running out of alloys. In 6 months, we won't even have enough propellant for station keeping, let alone defense. His hands shook slightly as he pinched the controls to expand an orbit, revealing clusters of flagged routes cut by interdictions. Punev's jaw tightened. Then we stopped waiting for their approval. The combined yard authority has full control now. Every asset, every machine shop, every mine. No more debates, Orn hesitated. Sir, the nations will fight this. They'll accuse us of overreach. They'll thank us when they're still breathing, Punev snapped, his gaze cut to Vax. Your report made one thing clear. This embargo is slaughter disguised as law. We can't win ship to ship. We win by turning every rock we touch into something they fear. Vax stepped closer to the display, his eyes narrowing at the asteroid belt. We mask our yards. Ore hulks, propellant farms, maintenance rigs, make them look like industry. Hide weapons under the skin. Force them to guess which convoy carries miners and which convoy carries guns. He jabbed a finger at the map. They can't blockade everything without strangling their own trade. Niels Davor, the quartermaster, emerged from behind a console. Grease streaked across his cheek, voice low but steady. I've been working prototypes already. Flechette pods that scatter from ore hulls. Shards fine enough to blind sensors, heavy enough to rip suits. If they board, they won't walk away clean. The engineers nearby turned, some wincing at the bluntness, others nodding grimly. Orn rubbed his temple, muttering, crude but effective. Vax caught his gaze. Not crude. Necessary. If they want to call us contraband smugglers, let them choke on the lie. Every hulk we arm is another chance to remind them what it costs to treat us as cattle. The chamber fell into silence for a heartbeat. Outside, the muted clang of loaders echoed through the dock. Moving containers filled with stripped alloys, recycled wiring, and torn suits. Every item carried scars of conflict, yet each one was being fed into fabricators already running beyond rated hours. Mar entered, clutching a slate crowded with recorded logs. He set it on the table with deliberate force. Their broadcasts from Vesta are already public. I've compiled casualty figures, reactor readouts, even fragments of the Council's own announcements. The world knows they slaughtered unarmed civilians. But we can't just tell the story. We have to show the ledger. Every item tagged, every name written. His voice carried a cold clarity, sharp enough to cut through the fatigue that hung over the room. Punev leaned forward, his expression hard. Then do it. Make sure their lies bleed ink before they bleed us dry. The planning continued deep into the night. Engineers mapped out asteroid trajectories, calculating how to hollow the interiors without exposing activity to passing patrols. Davor described the process of layering coilgun rails inside disguised ore haulers, his fingers smudging the schematics with graphite. Orn argued over power cycles, calculating how much energy could be stored without broadcasting signatures that would attract scouts. Every detail was weighed, every risk measured against survival. When the session finally ended, Vax stepped outside into the cold docking bay. The air reeked faintly of burnt insulation from overloaded converters, stinging his nostrils. Workers moved through the shadows with torches, their sparks lighting faces worn with fatigue yet lit with grim purpose. He paused as a young technician passed, carrying a crate of salvaged wiring. The boy's uniform hung loose on his frame, his skin pale from weeks without sunlight. Their eyes met briefly, and in that flicker, Vax saw the question that none dared speak aloud. Will this fight mean anything? He forced his voice steady. Every bolt you carry, every line you strip, it matters. Don't let them tell you otherwise. The boy straightened slightly, nodded, and moved on. Vax watched him go, then turned back to the skeletal shape of an ore hauler suspended in scaffolding. Its hull glistened with fresh plating, its interior already being cut and reinforced. It looked like a freighter, a vessel meant for dull cycles of rock and ore. But Vax knew what it would become, a weapon born from necessity. Punev approached, his boots striking sparks on the deck. You think they'll buy the disguise? They won't see it until it's too late, Vax replied. That's the only chance we have. His gaze lingered on the hauler, its hollow frame echoing with hammer strikes. The sound reverberated through his bones, a rhythm of survival beaten into steel. The Admiral exhaled slowly, the breath rattling through his teeth. Then let's build enough of them that the Council learns what exile truly means. Vax nodded, his mind already moving ahead. Each rock converted, each hulk armed, each survivor recorded. Every step carved toward a war they did not ask for, but would finish. Behind him, the clang of construction rolled on, sharp and unyielding, marking the birth of a fleet the Council had never imagined could exist. Council cruiser locking on, 30 seconds to inspection corridor. Niels Devore's warning punched through the channel, his voice low but edged like drawn steel. Commander Ryan Vax felt his jaw tighten as he stood in the command bay of the ore hauler Kharkov. On the laser plasma display, the cruiser's red silhouette loomed against the cold field of drifting rocks, its patrol beacon flashing authority. To the Council, Kharkov was nothing more than a bulk freighter, just another miner dragging stone from the belt. To Vax and his crew, it was the first blade Earth had forged in exile. The deck vibrated faintly as Devore's improvised coil guns cycled, rails hidden under layers of rock armor, camouflaged by decades of mining scars. Crewmen moved across the bay, their gloves slick with sweat, eyes darting between gauges. The air tasted metallic from recycled filters, sharp enough to sting the tongue. Vax caught that taste, swallowed, and focused on his officers. They think they are here to write us up for contraband. Let's remind them whose corridors they're walking into. A murmur passed through the crew, not cheers, but grim acknowledgement. They had seen Vesta. They had carried bodies frozen stiff, heard the hollow silence of ruptured hulls. Now every man aboard carried that memory as ballast heavier than steel. The cruiser transmitted its docking order, clipped and indifferent. Freighter Kharkov, prepare for inspection, maintain vector, power down drives. The voice was smooth, bureaucratic, the kind used to announce fines rather than murders. Vax glanced at Ledomar, seated at the comm station. Send acknowledgement, Vax said. Keep our tone quiet. Let them walk straight into the net. Mar's fingers tapped the console, his eyes dark and steady. Message away. They'll think we're compliant. He paused, then muttered, let them think it. Devore's hands hovered above the release triggers. Basilisk nets armed, gravel glass loaded. Just say the word, his mouth curved in something between a grin and a snarl. Vax raised a hand, steady. Not until they commit. He watched the cruiser glide closer, its hull lights gleaming across the ore field. He could almost hear the hiss of docking arms unfolding, feel the vibration of clamps scraping across hull plating. His men stiffened, every breath ragged with waiting. The impact came like a hammer, docking arms slamming against Kharkov's flank, shuddering through bulkheads. For a moment there was silence across the comms. Then the Council officer's voice again. Prepare for boarding. Vax's eyes hardened. Now! Devore slammed the release. From Kharkov's hull burst clouds of tungsten shards, exploding outward in directional cones, each flechette streaking invisible but deadly. At the same time, drones hidden in hollowed cargo pods discharged the gravel glass, micron-thin particles that swarmed sensors like swarms of gnats, rendering displays useless. The Council cruiser jolted, alarms bleeding into its transmission feed as its boarding arms were shredded, crew inside screaming as the shards cut through suits and plating alike. Coil guns! Fire sequence 1, Vax commanded. The disguised rails spat tungsten slugs from beneath ore layers, each shot driving deep into the cruiser's exposed radiator panels. On the display, the red icon flashed with damage markers, its system spasming under the sudden strike. Through the viewport, Vax saw the cruiser lurch, lights flickering, its stabilizers struggling to correct. For a heartbeat, he tasted victory, bitter and electric. Then he barked, cease fire, recover survivors if they eject. This isn't slaughter, it's a message. The crew obeyed, though some cursed under their breath. Pods drifted from the cruiser's ruptured sections, emergency beacons strobing faint blue. Tug arms extended, grappling the pods, hauling them inside. Men gasped inside cracked helmets, faces pale, hands trembling as they were dragged across Kharkov's deck. Some stared at Vax with naked hatred, others with disbelief that they were not executed outright. Mar moved quickly, logging every transfer, tagging every body recovered. Commander, we'll have evidence for every tribunal. Every round fired, every casualty treated. The Council won't bury this. His voice held the same clinical weight it always carried when the ledger became his weapon. Vax crouched beside one of the captured officers, his visor cracked, blood seeping from his temple. The man spat weakly. You'll burn for this. Vax's eyes narrowed. No, you'll live to tell them Earth won't crawl anymore. That's worse than death. The officer's gaze flickered, not with fear but confusion, as though the idea of survival in exile was alien. Vax rose, straightening, his voice cutting through the deck. Secure the prisoners. Send their ship's logs with them. Let the council read their own lies while they dress their wounds. Devore muttered as he wiped sweat from his brow. You're too merciful, Commander. Vax turned sharply. Mercy is the point. If they see us as butchers, they'll grind us down with numbers. If they see us as ledger keepers, every neutral trader will listen. That's how we win. The crew fell into silence, each man absorbing the weight of that truth. Around them, the ore haulers' bays echoed with the clang of closing hatches, the hiss of depressurization cycles, the faint rattle of debris clinging to armor. The air smelled of scorched fabric and cold sweat, sharp enough to bite the nostrils. Hours later, when the cruiser was towed off into the belt by emergency craft, Vax stood in the dim light of the command bay. The laser plasma display showed green arcs where Earth convoys still moved, red scars where Council patrols struck. Yet for the first time, a single red marker blinked out, not erased by annihilation, but removed by surrender. Mar leaned close, voice low. This won't stop them. You know that I don't want it to stop them, Vax replied. His hands rested on the railing, knuckles white. I want them to keep coming, to bring more patrols, more inspectors. Every time they do, we show the galaxy another log, another body we saved while they tried to erase us. That's how exile turns into something else, Devore approached, wiping grease from his hands, eyes fierce. You mean empire? Vax looked at him for a long moment, then back at the display where green and red clashed across the grid. His chest rose with a slow, deliberate breath. Not yet. For now, we're just proving we deserve to live. The rest will come when the corridors belong to us. The deck lights dimmed as Kharkov drifted deeper into the belt, carrying survivors, prisoners, and records alike. Men leaned against bulkheads, their bodies aching, but their eyes brighter than when they had launched. Each skirmish was more than survival. It was testimony, a foundation laid not with speeches, but with scars. Contact emerging from rift coordinates, destroyer class, forward batteries hot. The warning tore across the command deck of Taskline Kharkov, and every man froze for half a heartbeat. Commander Ryan Vax leaned toward the laser plasma display, the red silhouette of the Council destroyer flickering as it shuddered into real space. Its hull quivered with jump turbulence, shields unsteady, caught in the error margin Sextant had predicted months before. Hold your fire, Vax ordered, his voice firm but quiet, cutting through the tension like a blade. He knew the trap would only work if discipline outweighed fear. The destroyer's drives flared violently as it tried to regain balance, debris already clipping its forward panels. The rift was a graveyard of unstable trajectories. Most fleets avoided it like a curse, but Earth had studied its geometry, seeded it with inert rods drifting on silent arcs. Each one invisible, each one a loaded die waiting for the right roll. Niels Devore's knuckles whitened over the release triggers. They're bleeding velocity. If we wait too long, they'll recover. Vector sweat rolled down his temple, stinging his eyes. He didn't blink. Vax's gaze sharpened. Wait until they commit to stabilizers. When they flare, we open the net. The destroyer pitched, its hull groaning under invisible stresses. Then its radiators extended in a desperate bid to bleed heat. That was the moment Sexton had calculated, the window when the ship could neither maneuver nor shield itself. Now! Vax shouted. Coil guns roared inside the ore hulks. Tungsten slugs ripped through the black, striking radiator fins with thunderous force. The destroyer convulsed, molten fragments spiraling outward in bright arcs. On the deck, men shouted, the sound raw, triumphant, desperate. The laser plasma display lit with fracture lines as the cruiser's systems faltered. Second salvo, Devore commanded, his voice finally breaking into something fierce. More rounds hammered forward, each slug tearing deeper, Sparks erupted from the destroyer's spine, emergency pods jettisoning into the rift. Mars' calm voice broke through the frenzy. Incoming signal. Emergency broadcast. They're calling for reinforcements. Vax's jaw tightened. Cut the call. Deploy decoys. Make the rift theirs alone. Tiny drones darted outward, scattering interference bursts that shredded the signal. The destroyer's cry for aid died in static, lost to the Yuanoam rift's distortion. For the first time, a Council warship was not just slowed, it was isolated. Then came the twist. A smaller corvette blinked into existence at the rift's edge. Lured by the distress beacon Earth itself had seeded. Its captain believed he was arriving to save his fellows. Instead, the corvette emerged too close, colliding with a seated rod. The impact ripped its hull, spilling atmosphere and men into darkness. Systems flickered but did not die. The vessel staggered, alive but wounded. Board it, Vax said instantly. His tone was cold, final. We don't destroy this one. We take its shuttles launched, their hulls shaking as they skimmed the debris field. Grappling arms clamped onto the corvette's fractures, torch cutters blazing, air thick with the stink of scorched insulation and hydraulic fluids. Vax himself led the boarding detail, boots magnetized to torn decks, rifle raised. The interior reeked of burnt plastic and blood, alarms shrieking in broken cadence. A council officer staggered into view, weapon shaking in his grip. Vax moved first, his rifle snapping up. Drop it, he barked, voice slicing through the din. The officer hesitated, eyes darting to the men behind Vax, then let the weapon clatter to the deck. His face carried disbelief, not at losing, but at living. Rooms fell one after another. By the time they reached the command vault, resistance had crumbled. Mar arrived, already unpacking data tools, his eyes glowing with grim satisfaction. Commander, the vault is intact, sealed under tri-lock. Open it, Vax ordered. Minutes stretched, sparks showered as cutters sliced through armored seals. The taste of burning alloys coating tongues. Finally, the hatch gave way. Inside sat the vault, cold, humming with power. Mar accessed its feeds, his hands moving with practiced rhythm. Files bloomed across his heads-up display. Lines of council directives, maintenance logs, transport orders. He froze, then whispered, Rian, look at this. Vax leaned over his shoulder, his eyes narrowing. The logs detailed council plans to reassign fringe habitats by withdrawing support contracts, food shipments cut, life support denied, populations left to suffocate quietly. It wasn't war, it was extermination by bureaucracy. Each document carried signatures, schedules, budgets. Not propaganda, not rumor, proof. They planned to starve them out, Mar said, voice cold as ice. His knuckles tightened over the console. And now we have their handwriting. Vax felt a fire ignite deep in his chest. He looked at his men, faces smeared with soot and fear, but alive. We show this to the galaxy, he said. Every trader, every guild, every neutral port. Let them see what the council calls order divorce spat onto the deck, his voice harsh. Then we'll bleed them with ledgers before bullets. The corvette shuddered, stabilizers failing, alarms echoing through every corridor. Vax snapped. Orders, secure survivors. Patch hull breaches enough to tow. We leave nothing drifting here. Not corpses, not evidence. Hours later, Kharkov and its escorts pulled free of the rift, towing the captured corvette in silence. The laser plasma display glowed with new data, the stolen logs cataloged, tagged, ready for release. The crew stood weary, eyes hollow yet lit with something fierce. They hadn't just struck a blow, they had stolen the council's mask. In the command bay, Mar looked at Vax, his voice low, deliberate. When this reaches the neutral guilds, insurance carriers will shut them down. No one invests in murder when the receipts are public. Vax stared at the drifting corvette through the viewport, its hull scarred, lights flickering faintly. He thought of the habitats the council had marked for suffocation, families whose faces he would never know. His hand curled into a fist. They wanted to erase us quietly, he said. Now we'll speak louder than their guns. The crew around him said nothing. They didn't need to. The silence itself carried weight, heavy, raw, undeniable. Earth's exile was sharpening into something new, and in the rift of fire, a line had been crossed that could never be walked back. Broadcast it now. Every port, every guild, every carrier, Commander Ryan Vax demanded, his voice echoing in the cavernous chamber of Ceres' Grand Yard. The men assembled around him, officers, engineers, dock hands still streaked with grease, stared at the screens where Mar cued the files stolen from the captured corvette. The light of the laser plasma displays washed their faces in cold blues and sharp whites. Lines of data scrolled faster than eyes could track, yet the meaning was unmistakable. The Council had signed orders to let entire colonies suffocate. Ladomar's fingers tapped once, then stopped. You understand, Commander. Once this goes out, there is no turning back. They will call it forgery. They will call us liars. They called Vesta an inspection accident, Vax shot back, his jaw clenched, veins standing out in his neck. Let them choke on their denials. Every guildmaster knows the smell of an unpaid contract. This is worse. This is murder written in their own ink. The chamber fell still, the quiet broken only by the rasp of men shifting against steel benches. Some clenched fists, others lowered their heads as if bracing for a wave. Mar pressed the final key, and the room lit with transmission arcs. The stolen orders leapt into the ether, bouncing from relay to relay, impossible to cage. Minutes later, neutral channels erupted, the displays filled with incoming streams, insurers halting coverage, carriers refusing routes marked for seizure, trade guilds debating emergency sessions. Men leaned forward, their eyes widening as the flood of reactions arrived faster than the Council's sensors could block them. Admiral Punev entered, his steps heavy, boots striking like gavel blows. "What have you done?" he demanded, his graveled voice forcing every man upright. Vax met his glare head-on. "We turned their silence into testimony." Punev's stare lingered on the screens, where guild logos flickered and statements scrolled in real time. For a long moment, he said nothing, then exhaled slowly. "You've made us impossible to ignore. Now they will come with everything." "That was always their plan," Vax replied. His voice was softer now, but it carried more weight. "At least the world will watch when they do." The Admiral's gaze swept the men, then returned to Vax. "Then you'd better prepare them for the storm." That storm came faster than even Sextant had projected. Within days, Council patrols doubled their sweeps. Neutral haulers were boarded and turned away. Food shipments, destined for belt habitats, vanished into seizures. In the dockyards, men worked until their hands bled, fitting rails into ore hulls, wiring drives into disguised tankers, hiding missile pods beneath scrap plating. Sparks flew like swarms of fireflies, the air thick with the bitter sting of overheated insulation and the salt of sweat dripping into open cuts. Devore stormed into the assembly hangar one night, eyes bloodshot, uniform stained. He slammed a wrench onto the table, the clang rattling every cup nearby. "They're starving the colonies, Ryan. Dockmasters are rationing water. Kids are coughing blood in filters that haven't been changed in weeks." His voice cracked, but did not soften. "How long do we keep waiting?" Vax met his fury with calm steel. "Until the trap is ready. If we lunge too early, they'll crush us." You saw the rift. Timing made the difference between capture and slaughter. Devore's nostrils flared. "And while we wait, more die." Mar's quiet tone cut across them. "And if we strike blind, all die." He gestured toward the display where Council fleets massed at choke points. "We need their arrogance. We need them convinced we're still hiding in shadows." Devore swallowed hard, then turned away, his hands trembling. "Then you'd better make sure the trap is worth every corpse." Weeks stretched into months. Sextant worked day and night, calculating vectors, feeding plans into every dock. The men followed because there was no alternative, because survival had narrowed into one path. Convoys left Earth disguised as ore runs, but inside their cargo bays sat coil guns disguised as mining gear. Tankers trailed fuel pods that could turn into bombs with a single command. And all the while, Mar continued feeding the neutral guilds with records, casualty lists, reactor readings, intercepted Council orders. Each transmission tightened the noose around Council credibility. Guildmasters who once looked away now demanded explanations. Insurance brokers began canceling policies on entire Council operations. Traders muttered in corridors, whispering that perhaps Earth's exile had revealed something rotten at the core of authority. One evening, as crews ate in the shadow of scaffolding, a carrier captain from a neutral block approached Vax. His uniform was plain, his beard streaked with gray. He sat heavily across from Vax, the smell of salt pork and reheated beans thick between them. "I've seen your transmissions," the captain said. "If they're true, the Council will fall under its own weight." Vax studied him, eyes steady. "They're not claims. They're their own words. You know a forged contract when you see one." The captain nodded slowly. "I do. And I'll tell you this, guilds don't back murder. Not when it's written plain. But you'll be a target now. Every port that deals with you will be marked." "Then they'll see whose escorts arrive on time," Vax replied, his voice carrying the iron certainty of a vow. "And whose don't?" The captain studied him another moment, then stood. "I'll spread your files. But if you fail, every ship tied to you burns." Vax nodded once. "Then we don't fail." The next day, word spread that Marshal Avarkesh himself had been given command of a punitive fleet. It was not whispers. It was broadcast openly, a declaration meant to terrify. Laser plasma displays across every habitat showed the announcement. Rows of warships assembled, their banners bright, their beacons declaring lawful eradication of rebellious assets. Men watching clenched their jaws, some spitting at the screens, others gripping each other's shoulders in silence. In the command chamber, Punev addressed the officers. "The Council wants a final blow. They think we'll fold once they cut through Sewell. They think exile left us crawling. They have no idea what we've built." His fist struck the table, the sound booming through the hall. Vax rose slowly, his voice low but carrying to every ear. "They'll come for us believing we're cornered. When they do, they'll find the corridors no longer belong to them." The men erupted, not in cheers, but in a rumble of voices swearing, promising, growling their readiness. The air stank of sweat and oil, the taste of iron thick on tongues, the heat of bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder. In that moment, the Council's declaration of war was answered, not with banners, not with speeches, but with the simple certainty that every man present knew what was at stake. The ledger had been written in blood and ink alike. Now the Council would be forced to read it. "Load those mirror arrays before you close that hatch, or the entire flank collapses." Ryan Vax's command echoed across the cavern, carved into the face of Mercury's ridge. Sparks cascaded from welders overhead, painting the shadows with bursts of orange. The air tasted of scorched insulation and hot metal dust. Sharp on the tongue, bitter in the throat. Men clambered across scaffolds, sweat dripping into their eyes as they fought to secure panels, glowing under the relentless solar glare. Every movement was hurried, but none sloppy. Every worker knew the fleet bearing Marshal Avarkesh's banner was already inbound. Admiral Punev climbed the steel lattice and stopped beside Vax. His chest heaved from the climb, but his voice carried the weight of command. "The Armada will arrive within weeks. Their burn puts them on a direct line between Mars and Earth. Once they commit, they cannot disengage. Sextant's windows are tight. Too tight, Vax's eyes flicked toward the heads-up display on his wrist, showing orbital projections layered in green arcs. Then we make the windows hold. The ring fires Needlestorm on schedule, or we lose every belt station in a single pass." His voice did not waver, but beneath it lay the memory of Vesta, of frozen bodies drifting where homes had once been. That image guided every decision now. Niels Devore approached, his hands smeared with grease, the smell of burnt lubricant clinging to him. He set down a crate with a clang, revealing rows of tungsten darts stacked like silent knives. "We've hardened the payloads. They'll punch through radiators the moment those fins extend, but the launch rails are straining. Push them too hard and they'll shear apart." "Then we don't miss," Vax answered coldly. His gaze met Davor's, neither man blinking. They both knew the cost of failure would not be measured in broken rails, but in burning habitats. Elsewhere, preparations spread across the system. At Jupiter's moons, Men cut caverns into ice, dragging barges inside and filling their hulls with slush that would serve as armor. The corridors reeked of ammonia and cold brine, men coughing as vapors bit their lungs. Yet they kept working, layer upon layer, until each barge became a battering ram waiting in silence. Around Ceres, scaffolds wrapped o'er hulks, their hollow shells filled with coil guns, missile pods, and drone racks. The clang of hammers rang like drums, a rhythm of defiance that echoed through the caverns. Inside the command chamber at Ceres' Grand Yard, laser plasma displays lit every wall. Sexton's projections shifted with each update, streams of numbers and lines dancing as analysts adjusted vectors. Hal Orne, his face gaunt from sleepless nights, leaned against the console, fingers trembling as they traced orbital patterns. We've simulated 200 scenarios. Only 15 leave us standing. Every one of them depends on coordination across Mercury, Ceres, and the Jovian citadels. One missed signal, one mistimed volley, and the Armada punches straight through March, seated at the opposite station, spoke with quiet conviction. They'll expect desperation. They'll see scattered convoys, scattered rocks. They won't expect timing sharp enough to slice them apart. His hands moved steadily, tagging files, assigning men, recording commitments. We've made every death ledger into a lesson. That ledger will guide. This fight too, Punev's voice cut through, heavy as stone. We've put every resource into this, every miner, every hauler, every scavenger. If Sexton is wrong, Earth burns. Vax stood straighter, his shadow stretching long across the chamber. Then we make it right. Not by faith, by discipline. Every man will know his part, and every man will know the cost of failing it. His tone carried no poetry, only the edge of lived truth. The weeks that followed were grueling. On Mercury's ring, welders collapsed from heat exhaustion, the taste of salt and iron thick on their tongues, dragged off stretchers while replacements climbed up without pause. In the belt, coil gun crews practiced loading in darkness, fingers raw from metal splinters, voices hoarse from drill chants. At the Jovian citadels, barges rolled out of icy caverns, their hulls steaming under sudden sunlight. Each smelled of frozen brine and hot drive exhaust, each carrying men who knew they might never return. Devore gathered the crews on Ceres one evening, his voice rough but burning with conviction. Every dart you load, every panel you weld, every valve you twist, it's all that stands between us and annihilation. Don't think of yourselves as workers. Think of yourselves as the armor of Earthmen listened in silence, some with fists clenched, others with heads bowed. The words dug deep because they came not from speeches but from calloused hands that had built alongside them. Later, Vax walked alone along the outer scaffold of Ceres' yard. Stars glittered against the black, cold, and indifferent. Beneath him, ore hulks floated tethered together, their armored shells bristling with hidden weapons. He could taste copper in the recycled air, could feel the vibration of welders through his boots. For a moment, he allowed the weight of it all to settle, the responsibility, the faces that looked to him, the silent expectation that he would not falter. A voice crackled across his comm. It was March, steady as always. You carry more than you should, Commander. The ledger belongs to all of us, Vax exhaled slowly, his breath fogging inside the helmet. And yet if it fails, the blame will find one name first. Mar answered softly, then make sure it doesn't fail. We're with you. When Vax returned to the chamber, Punev was waiting. The council thinks we're fractured. They think we'll scatter when Kesh arrives. The Admiral's voice dropped lower, like a growl. Show them we've built more than weapons. Show them we've built unity. Vax nodded once, eyes narrowing at the projections where the red tide of the Armada pushed closer with each hour. The trap was nearly set. Every dart, every barge, every convoy hidden in shadows, all of it waited for one moment when Earth would either rise from exile or vanish into history. The clang of hammers still rang across Ceres. The sting of ammonia still clung to men in Jovian caverns, and the glare of Mercury still burned skin raw. Each hardship was a verse in the same story, one written not in speeches but in scars. And as the Armada drew near, Ryan Vax knew the next page would be written in fire. Marshal Kesh's fleet has entered Solburn Corridor. The announcement rang across the command deck, rattling through men already hunched at their stations. The laser plasma display stretched across the wall, glowed blood red as icons of Council warships flared into the system, their drives painting furious arcs. Ryan Vax gripped the railing until his knuckles ached. He had seen patrols, skirmishes, even ambushes in the rift, but nothing like this. The Armada was a wall of fire cutting straight for Earth, confident that sheer weight would smash through every trick Earth had laid. Admiral Punev's voice thundered. They've overcommitted. That burn leaves them no retreat. He turned sharply to Vax, his weathered face hard as stone. Every layer must hold. Miss a single volley, and they break us. Vax steadied his breathing. He looked around the chamber at men who had built hidden forts inside rock, who had welded panels until their hands bled, who had watched children cough in air that tasted like rust. Their eyes were wide, but none looked away. He nodded once. Then we hold. The first stage triggered at Mercury. Mirror arrays rotated in perfect sequence. Sunlight condensed into beams that lanced across space. Decoy heat blooms erupted like false fleets, drawing missiles into phantom signatures. The crew in the chamber could not hear the detonations, but they saw the screen flash as warheads tore themselves apart against empty targets. Devore slammed a fist into his console. False heat working. Half their first volley wasted. His teeth gleamed in a fierce grin, sweat dripping down his jaw. The second stage followed. Needle storm. From Mercury's ring, coil guns released darts of tungsten, thousands of them streaking silently through the dark. They struck radiator panels as the Council ships flared to bleed heat, tearing through fins with shattering violence. On the display, red icons flickered, coolant levels collapsing. Targets degrading, Halorn shouted, his voice cracking with exhaustion. He had lived months calculating this moment, every orbit timed, every angle measured. His hands shook as he traced arcs across the glowing board. Their ships are cooking themselves alive. But the Armada pressed on. Their formations shuddered but did not break. Vax saw them closing distance, weapons charging again, and his chest tightened. Sexton's plan demanded more than darts and mirrors. Now it was the turn of the frozen giants. Signal the citadels, Vax ordered. From the Jovian moons, hidden barges ignited drives, pushing themselves forward with slush still steaming from their icy armor. They moved ungainly, like massive beasts lumbering into a kill zone. But their purpose was brutal. The Council ships adjusted, trying to evade, but their radiators were crippled, their maneuvering sluggish. The first barge collided head-on, exploding into shards of ice and steel. The detonation washed across enemy hulls, peeling armor like bark stripped from a tree. Men on the deck of Kharkov roared, not out of joy but out of disbelief that the plan was working. The air reeked of sweat and fear, salt stinging the nostrils, but still they cheered, voices raw. Then Sexton's final order came through. Vax snapped upright. Deploy Spear of Dawn. The assault group ignited drives in skip-burn bursts, their bodies slammed into harnesses, ribs aching from sudden acceleration. Vax rode in the lead, visor filled with flashing indicators. The fleet ahead burned across his vision like a wall of fire. But his target was not the guns. It was the sleds behind them, the tankers, the fuel lines, the lifelines of the Armada. Cut their throat, Vax said through gritted teeth. His voice was low, almost calm, yet it burned through the channel like a brand. The strike was brutal. Spear of Dawn threaded through the gaps Needlestorm had torn open, coil guns firing point blank into storage tanks. Explosions rippled as fuel vented and ignited, scattering debris in waves that cracked against Council hulls. One sled ruptured entirely, its shockwave flinging escorts sideways. Devore howled into his mic. We've severed their supply chain. They'll suffocate out here. Still, Marshal Kesh's flagship pressed forward, its guns burning brighter, its beacons shrieking defiance. It loomed across the display, wounded but alive, cutting toward the inner system. Vax felt rage and admiration in equal measure. His enemy refused to die quietly. Then alarms screamed across the deck. The flagship's reactors were surging, containment failing. Orn's face blanched, sweat dripping into his eyes. If it goes uncontrolled, the fallout will wipe every civilian lane for 100 million kilometers. Vax didn't hesitate. I'll take it. He drove his breacher craft toward the flagship, men shouting his name across the channel. The hull of the enemy ship filled his view, scarred and burning, spewing fire. He cut drives, slammed clamps against the service spine, and forced the boarding latch open. The interior reeked of burning plastic and spilled coolant, smoke biting his throat as he ran through shattered corridors. Bodies lay sprawled, some still twitching, alarms shrieking overhead. He reached engineering, alarms flashing crimson across every panel. Heat pressed against his skin, even through the suit. He tore open a manual override, fingers blistering against the hot steel, and slammed the jettison sequence. Emergency locks blew, panels groaned, and the reactor core tore free, spinning away into the dark before it could erupt. Vax fell against the wall, gasping, chest searing with heat. He heard his men screaming through the channel, not in fear but in relief. On the display's back. At Ceres, the flagship icon flickered, then dimmed to a ghostly outline. Marshal Kesh's fleet staggered, crippled, its fuel gone, its heart cut out. Still it lingered, refusing surrender even as men floated from ruptured hulls. Vax's voice carried across the system, ragged but unyielding. Tow the survivors. Log everything. They thought they could burn us out, show them who kept the fire from spreading. On every ship, men sat in silence, their throats dry, their eyes burning. They had survived the Armageddon quarter, not by miracle, by sweat, by discipline, by scars earned in every dock and cavern. And as the Council fleet drifted broken in the dark, Earth's exile had turned into something greater than survival. It had become proof that no chain could hold them. Get those tow lines secure. If one breaks, their crews drift to nothing. Ryan Vax's voice carried through the battered hangar, graveled and strained but cutting through the clamor of men hauling cable across scorched decks. The Armageddon corridor lay behind them, but the wreckage of Marshal Kesh's once proud fleet still floated across the lanes like drifting tombstones. Tugs latched to crippled Council frigates, pulling them into controlled vectors while wounded officers inside lay strapped to stretchers. The air aboard Earth's makeshift docks was heavy with the tang of burnt wiring and the sharp bite of antiseptic. Everywhere men moved with frantic urgency, boots ringing against plates, gloves slick with grease and blood. Admiral Punev arrived from the command chamber, his uniform torn, his eyes sunken from days without rest. He stared across the cavernous bay at the prisoners being marched off transports, their faces hollow and pale, some whispering in disbelief that Earth had spared them at all. He turned to Vax, voice rough. We should let them crawl back to their council. They'll spread the word faster than any transmission. They'll do more than spread it, Vax answered. His throat burned, each word dragging like gravel. They'll be living proof that exile didn't finish us, that their punishment forged something stronger. He looked out the viewport where fractured warships turned slowly, lit by dying fires. Every ship we tow is a message. Earth does not erase. Earth endures. Ledamar appeared at their side, slate clutched tight in his scarred hands. His voice was low, deliberate. The logs are prepared. Casualty lists, reactor cycles, tow records. All of it ready for transmission. The guilds will see that we fought by ledger, not rumor. His gaze hardened. They'll also see who ordered the suffocation of entire colonies. Every signature is there. No denials left. Divorce stalked in, his face streaked with ash, his hands still trembling from loading darts until his muscles screamed. He spat to the floor. They won't forgive us. You think the council will sit back and lick their wounds? They'll come again. Stronger, Puna fixed him with a tired glare. Then we build stronger still. But first we let the galaxy see what has been born from exile. Word of the battle spread faster than anyone expected. Neutral carriers broadcast the images Earth released, rows of prisoners treated in medical bays, reactors stabilized by Earth engineers, convoys redirected safely while Council escorts drifted broken. Insurers withdrew entirely from Council military contracts, unwilling to back a power that lost both credibility and fleets. Trade guilds convened in emergency sessions, their delegates stunned by the data trails showing systematic strangulation of fringe habitats. One by one, fringe stations signaled Earth for protection. Some begged for escort, others offered docking rights in exchange for arbitration. For the first time, Earth held leverage not through guns alone, but through reliability. Convoys began to move under Earth's flag, their captains knowing escorts would arrive when promised and maintenance would be logged without corruption. In the Ceres chamber, Punev gathered the senior men. The table was scratched, the chairs dented, the walls scorched from weeks of fire. Yet the room carried a gravity heavier than any council hall. Punev's voice was quiet, almost reverent. We are no longer petitioners. We are no longer asking to rejoin what cast us out. We stand as something new. We stand as corridors kept open by men who bled for them. Mar set his slate down, the words already prepared. The Meridian Charter. Ports bound by standard codes, escorted by fleets born in the belt, judged by auditors with nothing to sell but truth. It will not be an empire of thrones. It will be an empire of ports. Vax studied the men around him. Their faces bore scars, their eyes shadowed by exhaustion, yet every gaze met his without wavering. He thought of Vesta, of the first corpses frozen stiff against broken walls. He thought of the tug limping through debris with children strapped to oxygen masks. He thought of the rift, where Earth had taken the Council's mask and torn it away. And he thought of the corridor, where men had died by the hundreds so others could breathe air that did not reek of blood. His chest tightened, but his voice came steady. Then write it. Let every starport know Earth stands for record, for order, for ships arriving safe. Let every world see that exile turned miners into guardians. The charter was signed not with ceremony, but with worn hands, pressing seals onto battered slates. The first lines bore the names of the dead from Vesta, inscribed so no man could forget what exile had cost. Clauses followed. Safe passage guaranteed. Arbitration open to all. Escorts maintained by joint fleets. Memorial funds debited from seized punitive accounts. It was not flowery, it was functional. That was its strength. When the first convoys departed under the charter, men watched from dock rails, their faces streaked with grease and pride. The ships glided past tethered wrecks of council cruisers, their lights steady, their routes marked and logged. For the first time since exile began, the lanes felt like more than survival. They felt governed. On the final night before he relinquished command, Vax stood alone at Ceres' Grand Yard. The scaffold stretched into the black, oar hulks bristling with weapons, tugs circling like shepherds guarding a flock. The air was cold, sharp in his lungs. Behind him, footsteps approached. It was Punev, shoulders bowed with age but his eyes still fierce. You gave them something to follow, the admiral said quietly. Not speeches, not banners. You gave them corridors that worked. Vax didn't look back. His gaze stayed fixed on the convoys, their lights threading across the dark. It was never about glory. It was about breathing tomorrow, about proving they couldn't erase us. With exile, Punev placed a heavy hand on his shoulder. And now it's more than survival. It's Empire. Vax finally turned, his jaw tight, his eyes shadowed but unbroken. Not empire as they knew it, not crowns, not courts. An empire that moves with every convoy and stands in every port. An empire built by exiles who refuse to vanish? The admiral nodded slowly. Then may the council learn what exile makes of men. As the convoy slipped further into the dark, carrying Earth's new banner across the lanes, Vax felt the weight in his chest ease for the first time in years. The ledger had been written, not in words alone, but in blood, steel, and stubborn breath. The council had banished Earth to silence. From that silence, Earth had built not merely a fleet, but an empire of its own. If this story sent shivers down your spine, smash that subscribe button for more cinematic HFY sagas where humanity turns exile into triumph. Now we want to hear from you. If Earth was cast out of the council in your version of history, what strategy would you use to turn survival into dominance? Diplomacy, industry, or sheer firepower? Drop your answer in the comments. We read every single one. Thanks for watching Stellar HFY, where exile forges empires and strategy carves victory. See you in the next story.